Hi guys, welcome back to 30 Days to Your First Website Design, a Tuts Plus premium course. I'm Ian Yates, and today we're going to talk about the anatomy of a web page. We'll begin as always by taking a quick look at what we're going to cover in this video. Firstly, we're going to examine the idea of conventions. Then we're going to open up Photoshop and take a look at what we're accustomed to as the anatomy of a web page. Then we'll look at a few common examples, and before we jump into the next video, I'm going to set you a small assignment. So let's just consider this idea of conventions. And no, I'm not talking about Star Trek conventions. What I mean by that is behavior and structure which we as users have come to expect over the course of time. And I'm not just referring to web design here, I'm including all graphic design. And as I've mentioned, web design is the offspring of print design and has inherited a lot of its practices from its parent. Now we are, for example, accustomed to visiting a website and seeing a logo, primary navigation, perhaps a heading of some kind, all at the top of the page. And it's logical we should do this, particularly in the West, where we read written page from top left to the bottom right. It's comfortable for us and it's instinctive. Therefore it's become common practice to place important elements, those at the top of the information hierarchy, at the top of the page. Often, as we've mentioned in previous videos, the logo will be placed top left, the first thing our eyes meet when they enter the page. So that's what conventions are and their reasons for being, but how about the why? Well, there's nothing to say you have to lay out your page just like the majority of web pages. As someone clever once said, and I've no idea who, rules are for fools to follow and to guide the wise. Now, as I've also said, there's no right or wrong in web design, but there is reaction and opinion. By sticking to conventions, you're removing some of the mystery from your page. The users will be familiar with what they're looking at and how they should deal with it. As we've talked about before, users have a habit of scanning a page rather than examining it. Familiar layouts take far less time to decrypt than alternatives. In following conventions, you've removed another hurdle between them entering the site and completing whatever action it is you expect of them. Okay, so let's open up Photoshop and construct a typical anatomy of a web page. Now I'm firstly just going to open up a 960 grid template, just like we were talking about in our previous video, and I'm going to drag some assets in to clearly build up a basic anatomy. Firstly, I'm going to begin by turning on my guides. So we'll start with the header region. Now that's typically at the top of the page, of course. That's why it's called the header, and that will often be joined top left by a logo, so we'll just plonk that there. Now also in the top of the page, often within the header region or certainly close to it, you'll have persistent navigation. What I mean by persistent is that it's present throughout the site. Now possibly there'll be a search bar field there, plonk that down, and then you'll have your features and your content, which will more often than not take up the left or the right or even the whole width. So we'll put an example features area in there, and then some content as well. And then what you'll also have is often a sidebar. So we'll just put that down there. And we'll just align things properly here as such. There we go. Now I'm just going to select everything I've put on the page so far, and I'm going to drag it up slightly, which will leave me some room for the inevitable footer, which often always finds its way at the bottom of the page. Okay, now I'm going to get rid of my guides and I'll just make my grid invisible. So there you can see we've quickly mocked up a pretty good rendition of a common page anatomy. Now let's go back into our presentation and examine some common examples of that. Here we go. Now what you'll notice as we browse through these various examples is that in spite of their varied styles, they all follow firstly a grid as we discussed in our previous video, but they also adhere more or less to the anatomy we just talked about. Headers, logos, navigation positions. So even if you've never seen some of these sites, they'll feel oddly familiar to you. Okay, it's time for some further reading. I'd like you to take a look at this Web Design Tuts article on the F layout. It demonstrates, using heat maps which highlight areas of attention, how a user's eye typically scans certain layouts. It talks further about the Western convention of beginning top left on a web page and working downwards. And as always, before we jump into the next video, I have an assignment for you. Actually, there's no assignment on this occasion. I'm going to go easy on you. Now, next time on 30 Days to Your First Website Design, we're going to round off all this theory we've been covering by taking a look at white space. I'm Ian Yates, and from all of us here at TouchPlus, thank you for watching.